Welcome to Introduction to Human Resources Management, Chapter 1, Managing Human Resources. Human resource management refers to the policies, practices, and systems that are put together that influence employees' behavior, attitudes, and performance. The policies put forth by human resources, along with senior management of an organization, will have a direct impact on all of those things. The behavior of the employees, the culture that the company has, the attitudes, the satisfaction with the job, and performance evaluation and assignments of duties. In general, when employees and customers are satisfied, it occurs when companies tend to be more innovative, more productive, or have a favorable reputation. If you have well-managed HRM, then you can enhance each of these objectives. HR helps to support the culture of an organization, and therefore it can directly go towards innovation because management will understand that they need to hire the right kind of people, they need to have the proper policies in place to allow people to express themselves in an original and innovative manner. If human resources are designed correctly, people will have the proper processes and workflows to be able to become more productive. Productivity is essentially a measure of efficiency. If you are able to do more with the same amount of resources, then you will increase your productivity. That also means that you will have more output for the same level of expense. And because profit is defined as revenues less expenses, if you are able to become more productive, you can increase your profit. In addition, well-run companies with good HR policies usually are places that people want to work. And when you are a company trying to hire quality employees, having a good reputation in the field is quite important. Places like Glassdoor.com and other websites often include reviews of organizations. Many companies try to get into magazines for the top 100 or top 500 places to work in a particular region or an industry. And if you are an organization that has a good reputation where people want to work, then it will be a lot easier to recruit and hire people that would give you an advantage going down the road. The next slide has a graphic that shows basically all of the topics that we're going to be covering during the course. And first is analysis and design of work. What kind of jobs do we have? What types of assignments should we create? And all of the duties that are incumbent upon each job and what types of requirements and skills people have to be able to complete those duties. HR planning includes looking at the marketplace to determine whether or not there is a surplus or a deficit of potential employees, whether you have too many employees, you have a surplus in your current organization, or you have too few. It also includes writing out the policies, figuring out the best course of action to be able to provide benefits and salaries. Recruiting is finding the people that you're looking for. Selection is picking the ones that you feel fit the organization the best and meet the criteria that you've decided upon. Training and development is to take people and make them better at their current jobs and prepare them to be able to get future jobs and promotions. Performance management is essentially the evaluation process that managers and supervisors use to ensure that assignments are completed effectively and efficiently by their employees. Compensation refers to the amount of money that the company sets aside to pay their employees, and it's important that the companies remain competitive in terms of the amount of money and compensation through a benefits package as well that they provide to employees, because if you are not competitive, you will not be able to recruit and select the best people that could give you a competitive advantage. And finally, employee relations, making sure that people understand what those policies are, what the practices are, availability for training and development, benefits packages, and any type of disciplinary issues as well as performance management. That all comes through employee relations. If you happen to work for a company that does have a union population of employees, which is relatively small comparatively to what it used to be in the United States several years ago, then you would also have labor relations included in employee relations so that you could manage the contract that you have with the union. And we'll get to that a little bit later. Looking at human resources within the context of company performance, a couple of terms are important to cover. One of them is human capital. Capital, T-A-L, not T-O-L, which would be the capital of a state or a country. Capital, in a business sense, refers to anything of value that can be used to create more wealth. So if you have money, you can invest it in a company. If you have skills, if you have equipment, if you have various types of knowledge, anything that you can use to be able to create a business venture and then get a return on that investment is referred to as capital. Capital, again, can refer to money, other resources, equipment, inventory, transportation, real property. But human capital refers to the people who work for you, and it's important to recognize that you should not treat humans as you would the rest of the resources because they are people with rights that equipment, for example, does not have. But they are resources of the company, and it's important to view them as something that is valuable and to be nurtured and managed correctly in order to get the best out of them, because most companies really depend on their employees to accomplish all of their objectives. You can refine and improve that human capital by providing training to your employees. As we'll talk about later in the chapter on training and development, training is slightly different than development. Training is a formal process by which you can get the skill set of an employee better for the job that they're currently doing. Development is to provide certain skills and knowledge to employees that have been earmarked or highlighted as potential candidates for promotion in the future. So training gets you better to do the job that you're at currently, while development is to prepare you for the next job that you're going to have. It's important that companies do both, because when people retire or if they leave, it's important to be able to have some type of a succession plan, a process by which you can identify substitute employees to be able to backfill a position if there happens to be a vacancy. If you are taken by surprise that a senior person leaves, then you would probably just have to go out to the outside, do a posting, conduct recruitment and selection, and that can take a lot of time. And as the old business saying goes, time is money. If you have a succession plan in place and you have trained people to be adept at their current positions, and you have given them some certain types of management training, interaction with people, understanding how HR policies work and the like, then they can be identified as potential candidates to move up and get a promotion. And if they come from within, that does a couple of things. It lets the company employees know that if they work hard and do what they're supposed to do, then there will be an award down the road and you can get promoted from within. It also saves the company time and money, because you can cut down on that recruitment and selection process and the amount of training and development that you would have to give to a new employee taking a new position. If they were already a current employee and understand the nature of the job and the organization that you work for, their transition would be a lot quicker and smoother. And again, that translates into efficiency and cost savings, which could add to profit. Another aspect of human capital is experience. The more people work on a job, the better they become at it, typically. If they're not getting better at it, then that's a different issue that we'll talk about later in terms of performance management. But just being on the job, everybody seems to get better at their job the more they do it. So providing the opportunity for employees to gain experience in different aspects of the job is pretty important, and that's something that HR should work with management to ensure. You also want to hire people that have good judgment, have a level of intelligence commensurate with the requirements of the skills that are needed for the job, and they have to have the ability to have good relationships with their fellow employees, both going up for management and their subordinates, or the employees that report to them. And we also want to be able to have people with insights and the ability to come up with ideas and innovation. All of these things contribute to human capital, and these are assets of the company. And if you nurture them and manage them correctly, you will get the most out of them, which again can give you a competitive advantage. The next slide just has a graphic of how all of the things that we're going to be talking about kind of interrelate to one another. You've got human resources management on the left. They're going to be involved in looking at the various types of human capital and ensuring that you get the most out of it. They're also going to be looking at the behavior aspects of human capital. What motivates people to want to get training, to gain that experience, and to perform at a high level. It also is about that effort that is needed to be able to perform at a level that is commensurate with adequate or superior performance. On the other side of the graphic, you have the bubble that refers to organizational performance. So the quality of what we're doing, how profitable we are, and again, profitability goes to efficiency and effectiveness and productivity. You also want to have customer satisfaction. If you have satisfied employees and they interact with your customers, they will probably be relating to your customers in a way that leaves those customers with a positive impression of your company, and that makes them more likely to be repeat customers. As a business, there is a cost to customer acquisition. That's why companies go out and they advertise, and why they give out coupons and they do marketing and they have public relations. It's to get the information out there so that they can acquire new customers. Once you get that customer, it is much more efficient to be able to keep them as a repeat customer than it would be to lose them because they were dissatisfied, either with the quality of the materials or the performance that you were providing, or they were unhappy with the employees that they interacted with. If you can keep those customers, then your customer acquisition costs will drop and you can become more profitable down the road. And that is largely correlated to having a satisfied employee base who understand how to treat your customers. If they are both happy and they have been trained to be able to interact with your customers to keep them satisfied, then you will likely be more profitable than the competition. All of this is pointing to something called a sustainable competitive advantage. Now, a competitive advantage is simply some type of attribute or a strength that an organization or a person has that allows them to outperform their competitors because they have superior value, They can lower their costs and, again, become more productive and profitable. And you have that advantage and you can maintain it over a period of time. The example that I often give for competitive advantage is the sport of basketball. There is a very significant advantage if you are tall. The hoop is 10 feet off the ground, and if you're 5'5", you could be the greatest basketball player in the world. And if you go up against someone who's 7 feet tall, they don't have to be the greatest basketball player in the world. All they really have to do is extend their arm over your head to try to block your shot. That is a competitive advantage. The idea of a competitive advantage is if you are able to acquire one, you may not even need to actually perform at 100%. Like I said, if you have a basketball team of people under 6 feet that are the best in the world at their size, they would probably struggle with a basketball team of people who are 6'8" and 7 feet tall that are just okay. They don't have to perform at a higher level because they have some inherent advantage that they are able to exploit. If they are also happen to be really good at their job, in this case basketball, then there would be even a greater competitive advantage. Companies try to acquire this by hiring good people, by having really efficient and effective policies that are in place, better equipment and better workflows to be able to produce the objectives that they're trying to accomplish. Now, I've mentioned effective and efficient a couple of times, and you will hear them repeatedly throughout your business career. To be effective is simply to be able to accomplish something, to get something done. To be efficient is to be able to accomplish something and get something done by using the least amount of resources possible. If you're a construction company and you have a contract to build a bridge and it takes $10 million to do it in a year, if you do it on time and on budget, then that's good. If you're able to do it in 9 months, for $8 million, then not only were you effective, but you were more efficient than a potential competitor could have been because you're able to have processes in place that give you that competitive advantage. So you need to be effective. You can't even calculate efficiency if you don't get the job done. The efficiency is basically zero. But if you're able to get the job done, if it takes you 5 years and $100 million as opposed to 6 months and $8 million, then one is going to be more efficient than the other, even though they were both effective. Human resources can help give a company a competitive advantage on top of whatever equipment or processes and policies that they have in place because they recognize that their employees are valuable. They are a resource of the company. It is human capital. You have to also recognize that these are people. If I have a piece of equipment that is really good and it gives me an advantage, my competitor can go out and buy the same piece of equipment or potentially build something similar enough to it to be able to minimize or close that gap between their performance and our performance. However, if I have employees that are better than their employees, it's much more difficult for them to be able to catch up. People are unique. They are rare if you have really high level of quality and skill. It's not capable of imitation. You can't just go to the store and pick them up off the shelf. Every person has their own capabilities, and if you are able to attract the best employees and your competitors cannot, that gives you an advantage that cannot be repeated or replicated. Also, if you happen to have the best person in the world in a particular job, the other people can't get that. Not right away, at least. They may be able to recruit someone who becomes at a high level, but it's not something that can be substituted or at least easily substituted like a piece of equipment could be. So the value of human resources has to be recognized by companies if they want to be able to achieve a competitive advantage. And you want to get a competitive advantage if you want to be successful in your industry and get a high level of profitability compared to your competitors. Part of what HR should seek to do is to create a high-performance work system. This is basically when an organization uses technology, the organizational structure that they've developed, the people that they've hired, and all the processes and policies that they've put together, all are coordinated and with one objective in mind, and that is to create a competitive advantage that you are able to sustain going forward. High-performance work systems can include training programs to be able to improve that human capital and get people better at the jobs that they're currently doing. You could also add development to that to get them prepared to do their next job. It also includes recruiting people who may have skill sets that you don't currently have on staff, or at least you can expand the skill sets that you currently have. And you can also create a system of rewards so that behaviors like teamwork, flexibility, learning, innovation, achieving objectives that have been set that are a little bit more aggressive than what you've been currently doing. All of these things are part of the compensation package that we'll talk about in a subsequent chapter. All of these things tie into what would be considered a high-performance work system. HR is a portion of a company just like any other, and oftentimes it's best to look at the human resources staff as employees of the rest of the company. Your clients are the managers, the supervisors, and the senior management, and the employees themselves of a company. You are the source of authority. You are the source of information for everything related to the job. All the administrative transactions and services that you provide, the hiring, the separation, the training, the development, the benefits, the selection of health plans, things of that nature, any type of disciplinary action that may be taken, compensation decisions. All of these are administrative services and transactions, and that is part of the HR product line that the staff of HR will owe to their clients, who are essentially the employees of the company. HR staff should also be able to partner with the rest of the company's employees and managers. You want to have business partner services so that when you go to marketing, they're able to hire the right people for the marketing department. You can go to accounting and you can hire the right people for the accounting department. You can be a strategic partner too with senior management because HR has a lot to do with the growth of a company. If you want to expand and move into other areas, you're going to have to hire more people. If it happens to be that something that you're manufacturing is now obsolete, you may need to conduct layoffs or retrain people to do other work because the things that they're doing right now are no longer necessary. These are all strategic issues that should be spelled out by senior management, but it should be put into play by the HR staff that is working with them. HR is responsible for coming up with all of the administrative personnel policies and enforcing them and applying them down the road, and also ensuring that there is compliance with all the labor laws, both state and federal, and potentially local, that would apply to your employees. The next slide goes through a list of all the various functions and responsibilities. I'm not going to go through it here, but it is in the PowerPoint and in your text. I would suggest that you read through it. But it's all the basic stuff that we talked about at the outset: analysis and design of work, recruitment, selection, training, and development. So please take a look through that and understand what the function of each of them is and what the responsibilities are to be able to effectuate the completion of those functions. Among the other responsibilities of human resources departments is to look at the jobs and analyze them and determine exactly what they consist of. What types of work needs to be done? Who needs to do it? How much work should one position be responsible for? How do they interact with all of the other jobs? The job design is actually defining how each job works and how those tasks are going to be performed within that given job. When I was in college, I had a part-time job on the weekends and holidays as a janitor. And when I got the job, it was at a hospital. And the first day I went through training, and they brought me along and they gave me a schedule. I worked from 7 to 3. And at 7 o'clock, between 7 and 7:30, I had to vacuum the rug in the emergency room, for example, or I had to mop the floor in the operating room. They'd had a whole list that spelled out my entire day, including my breaks and when my lunchtime was. And if you think about it, it's not the most skill-dependent job that there is. Many people can be janitors. But somebody in HR, specifically HR and the housekeeping department, they had to walk through that entire hospital and count how many trash bins there were, how many trash cans need to be emptied, how many rugs need to be vacuumed. They had to map every single inch of that hospital to be able to make sure that they could provide the service. Then they had to look at that job analysis, and then they had to design each job to be able to make sure that all of the items that they've identified are able to be handled, and that each job is not overloaded or is too light on the duties that they have. I had a job that was 7.5 hours a day, and they had to come up with a list of things that would take 7.5 hours. If you don't do that, if you don't map out the jobs and figure out what jobs you need and what each job is going to consist of through job design, you won't know how to hire people. You won't know what jobs need to be satisfied. You won't know how many people you need to have. So all of that is a very important part of what HR does. What happens very frequently, just as an aside, when companies write up all of these job analysis and job designs and the job descriptions that they use to actually go out and recruit and select people and hire them, they tend to write them and then put them in a drawer or in a file somewhere, and they very rarely change. And the nature of the current world in which we live with technology and other things that are changing at a very high rate, job descriptions can change very frequently, and it's important that HR does stay up to date to ensure that their job analysis and job design reflects the actual current state of the industry to make sure that you're not missing out on any potential efficiencies that you could exploit. Among the other responsibilities of human resources is to recruit new employees. That's basically looking for applicants for potential employment. They can be internal candidates from within the company's group of current employees, or they could be external candidates, either graduating from college or just entering the business world, or they could be currently employed elsewhere, or they have lost a job and they're looking for a new job. You want to be able to identify people that fit those job descriptions that you've created and to determine whether or not they have the skill sets necessary, or at least could be trained up to be able to do the job that you have that's available. The selection process is when an organization looks through the recruitment, winnows down the list of potential candidates, and gets to a smaller cohort of people that would be very likely to be able to satisfy the job. You want to make sure that they have the proper knowledge, skills, and abilities, and whatever other characteristics are important to be able to help the organization fill that job and achieve its goals. One thing to consider about human resources is it becomes a lot easier to manage your employees if the employees that you've hired are well suited to the job. If you inherit employees and their style is a little bit different and they're not capable of doing the things that you necessarily want them to do, it can be kind of difficult. But the idea, if you hire the right people at the outset, it becomes a lot easier for the company to achieve its objectives, and it becomes much simpler for managers to handle their employees because they're not asking them to do anything that's beyond their abilities. Some of the qualities that you want to look for when you're recruiting and selecting employees is problem-solving skills, the ability to work through things independently and come up with a solution that is effective and efficient. Having the interpersonal skills that are capable of allowing them to work well with a team, but also understanding how team dynamics work. We will have a chapter about that a little bit later. People with a strong work ethic, those that are driven from within and are conscientious and are able to do everything that is required of them to be able to succeed at the job. You also want people who are capable to analyze information, use their quantitative skills to come up with solutions, also to think a little bit abstractly, and written communication skills, which I personally believe have been falling by the wayside with the advances of AI and some other things that necessarily kind of minimize the amount of time people usually spend perfecting their ability to write and to communicate with other people. Written skills and even verbal skills are kind of in high demand, and if you're capable of hiring people that are good at it or improving your own written and verbal communication skills, that can give you an advantage to make you more marketable for your next job. We've already talked a bit about training and development. As I said, training targets people's knowledge, skills, and abilities that they need for the job that they're currently doing, while development is to impart knowledge, skills, and behaviors that improve your ability to meet the requirements of a job that you may be eligible for in the future. Performance management typically occurs when a manager or supervisor assesses the performance of one of their subordinates. That is done according to the policies that are created by HR, and HR should be working with all of their clients in the organization to ensure that performance management is conducted in a way that makes sense and, by the way, is legal. There are a lot of requirements from the federal and state governments that must be complied with. The idea behind performance management is to ensure that employees are doing the things that they need to do to meet the organization's goals. So if you want to ask them questions, getting questionnaires about how to measure performance is useful. You can ask managers and supervisors, as well as your own consumers, your customers out there, are they getting what they need? You can ask those questions all around and try to pinpoint what the problems may be so that they can be addressed. The reason that you would try to collect this information is very similar to what you would do when you go to the doctor's office. A doctor cannot prescribe treatment until they get enough information about your symptoms to find out what's wrong. Asking questions about what people need to know, what people should be doing, that's important so that you can be able to get an effective solution to any problems that may be identified. Performance management can also focus on the short term, usually within a quarter or less than a year. But it can also focus on the long term, like a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. Where do we want to be, in the future in terms of developing our body of work? As noted, performance management is typically conducted by the employee supervisor, but it should be done in accordance with all of the rules and policies that have been implemented by HR. HR typically will also train managers on the most effective ways to conduct performance management. Other responsibilities of human resources include planning pay and benefits. The amount of compensation that you get from your employer is typically broken down into 2 aspects. Now, you could have a job without benefits, and then you're just looking at pay, which is either a salary, which is a yearly amount that you get regardless of how many hours you work, or it is a wage, which is typically a hourly wage that you make, depending on how many hours you work. If you have benefits, typically that would include things like healthcare, time off, dental, vision, any other perks that are in addition to the money that you're getting from your employer or the money that you're providing to your employees if you are the employer. Pay can also include bonuses. We're going to talk about incentive pay in a few chapters. They could also include commissions and any other performance-related pay. So when we get to the chapter about incentive pay, we'll get into the more specifics about that. But HR does have to understand what it is that the company's trying to achieve and look at that in the context of establishing the proper salary, wages, benefits, etc. Benefits are also an expense of the company, and as we noted, if you can keep your expenses lower, you can make a bigger profit. There's a bit of a trade-off here, though, because if you are a company that does not offer a very compelling benefits package, you may not be able to attract the types of employees that could give you a competitive advantage. So, the old adage is you get what you pay for. That can also include the benefits package, and HR is typically really responsible for trying to minimize the expense. Some of that comes down to how much is shared by the employer and the employee. Typically, if you have, for example, healthcare, the company is providing healthcare, but there is a contribution that must be done and paid by the employee. The amount that that employee pays, whether it's in terms of premium assistance, co-payments, or co-insurance, which we'll talk about later, all of that does go into the amount of money that the company has to spend to be able to provide those expenses. And HR has to determine what is the sweet spot, what's the most compelling level where we can provide benefits that people value and therefore attract people that are able to do the things that we need them to do to get that competitive advantage while still being competitive and productive and able to turn a profit. Administering pay and benefits is also a key function of HR. You have to have computer systems that are in place. There are companies that provide learning management systems for training, time and attendance for keeping track of payroll and time off. Many of these companies have these things and they include them on an intranet system where people can log in and put their time in. Managers are able to go in and look at a dashboard to determine how much time people have in the bank in terms of their time off for paid time off, whether it's vacation, sick, or just a generic paid time off if the company does not differentiate between time. The intranet is also a good place for companies to post information about the benefit plans, whether there's open enrollment for their healthcare plan, whether they want to pay for an extra amount of life insurance, for example. All of these things can be provided in these computer systems that people can access. And by having a good system in place, a good computer system that everyone is knowledgeable of and capable of using, it can cut down on the amount of time that HR has to spend managing these processes. So again, that does lead to efficiency and therefore productivity. HR does require a lot of extensive record keeping and reporting. There's also an ethical component that goes to that because all of this information that you're getting has a lot of personal information and there are legal requirements that we'll talk about again coming up. But you do have an awful lot of records that you have to keep, both for maintaining your own employment records so that you know who's working, who's not working, how many people you have, how many people are on your payroll, how much taxes you have to pay, whether there are workers' compensation claims, whether there's unemployment claims. All of these things have to be tracked, as well as the information that you have to relay to your health insurance provider. All of these benefits that you're providing, you have to keep records for all of this in order to make them function correctly. Maintaining positive employee relations is a key element of ensuring that your employees are satisfied and therefore more likely to stay with the company. Losing qualified employees because you cannot retain them, they go to another company because they're dissatisfied or the other company pays them more, there's a better opportunity. That can be a real problem in maintaining that competitive advantage. If you've got good employees, you want to be able to retain them. Having a lot of turnover is a very expensive proposition. If you hire someone, they're not going to know how to do the job right away in most cases. So it's going to take them 3 months, 6 months, maybe even a year to figure out how to do the job correctly. And that means that current employees, including you or any manager that they work for, is going to have to spend time getting them up to speed. Once they finally get the knowledge that is necessary to do the job, then the expense of hiring that employee starts to drop. And the longer they stay with the company, the more that expense continues to drop. If that employee is dissatisfied and then they quit and they go to your competitor, you've taken the expense of recruiting, interviewing, hiring this person, training them, having other people train them, getting them adept at their job, getting them ready to be profitable for your company. And then because of some type of an issue that led to their dissatisfaction, they leave and go work for your competitor who's getting the advantage of the resources that you invested in this employee. That is not a practical way to conduct business. Retaining your employees because you keep them satisfied is a real key to be able to reduce expenses and maintain profitability. Part of satisfaction is making sure that people understand what the rules are. A lot of times people are surprised by a decision that is made from HR. They shouldn't be surprised because they should know what the policies are. You can train people on the policies, you can make them available. Transparency and giving as much information is really important because when people don't know information, they tend to assume the worst about what's transpiring. Employees will have questions. They will ask questions either through phone or email or online forms. HR needs to really respond to those questions. If they have a question about their benefit package, when is open enrollment, I need to take time off, I have to have family and medical leave. Having this information available at their fingertips can move these processes along a lot quicker. So whenever an issue arises, the faster it can be processed, the more efficient it can be processed, the more money the company will save, and the more satisfied the employees will be, which could lead to their retention. You also may have to negotiate union contracts if you happen to have union employees, and you want to be able to maintain open communications with union representatives to ensure that you are complying with the policies and the contractual requirements of the collective bargaining agreement that you have with the union on behalf of those union employees. Part of maintaining the positive relations with your employees and ensuring that they have information available to them is creating and administering these personnel policies. You should have policies about how to hire people, about how to conduct discipline when it's necessary, how to promote people, what factors there are to look at, what types of benefits people should get. You should also communicate that through a lot of different channels. You can do trainings, provide presentations, have meetings, post documents, send emails, put notices on your intranet. You could even put things on social media, for example. Making sure that people have as much information as possible without potentially overloading them. You still want to have people that they can talk to if they're not able to figure it out. All of that is very important, and it can lead to higher levels of satisfaction. Human Resources Department will collect a lot of information. If you've ever had a job, you've probably sent in information about your name, your address, your social security number. You may give them your bank account information, your routing number for paychecks. There could be a lot of information pertaining to your medical background, any types of illnesses that you may have had that have justified time off. All of that information is kept by Human Resources. So you have to handle those records, but you also have to respect the privacy of the people that you are curating that information for. The general rule is if you have a need to see that information, it is justified. If you do not have a business purpose to see some information pertaining to a person's private information, then you should not be looking at it or sharing it with anyone. If a manager has a question about someone who's out and they want to know how long it's going to take for them to get back, you can give them information pertaining to how long they will be out on family and medical leave. That does not necessarily mean that you need to give them a diagnosis or give them information about their doctor's visits. All they really need to know is how it affects their ability to manage their employee. Only the information that they need to know should be collected, and they should not be accessing anything that they don't. Otherwise, you could be violating someone's privacy. There's a lot of rumors that go around, a lot of gossip. You may see something that seems very interesting. You should not be talking about other people's personal information, who got divorced, who is going on medical leave, over lunch with people that have no business need to know that information. That would be a violation of the privacy and probably a violation of your ethical policies for the company that you work for. All of that information also does have value. So when you collect a lot of information about the people that are working there, your employees are putting in time, you're looking at their performance assessments, all of that information can be used to collect data that can be created into forms, charts, information that management can use to make decisions. You can get these quantitative tools and use scientific methods to look at data to help make evidence-based decisions supporting the goals in the future. How much output do we have for the people that are on staff? Which employees are performing at a higher level? And preferably, why are they performing at a higher level? If you know why, then you can probably bring up the others that are not performing at a high level through training by utilizing the knowledge and skills that your best performers have. You won't be able to do that if you don't collect this information. There is another old business adage, if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. All of this information that you're collecting is essentially data. Data is raw material. You can take that data and put it into charts and forms and make assessments from it. Then data becomes information. And managers, supervisors, and other employees need information to be informed to make these types of decisions. HR can contribute a lot through all of this information that they get. But again, you have to draw the line between regular business metrics and information that may be considered personal, private information of an employee. HR, its employees, and all the managers and supervisors, basically everybody in an organization, should be respective of complying with all of the laws that are in place. Failing to comply with the law could lead to legal action. You could get sued. You could be investigated by the government. You could be fined. It's very important that HR staff follows and is aware of the rules. You can't follow them if you don't know what they are. So some of the things that we'll look at, and there is a chapter that will get into this again. This is more of an introductory chapter, but we will be talking about this in greater detail. There are requirements for equal employment opportunity. There are things related to organizations' health and safety for employees, pay and benefits, employee privacy. Managers depend on HR staff to be able to keep track of all of these requirements, to be aware of them, and to be able to process them if things arise that need to be addressed. Lawsuits are expensive. You have to hire a lawyer. If the lawyer has to go to court, you're looking at $300, $400, $500 an hour. Sometimes court cases can take a year, 2, 3, 10 to resolve. I myself, when an attorney, and I had been involved in lawsuits involving employees. The longest was probably about 3 years that went through an appeal process. It takes a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money. They're very expensive. And I always tell my students the best way to avoid legal costs is to avoid getting sued. And if you can avoid getting sued because you are doing things the way that you're supposed to be doing and you're giving information to people, they are less likely to feel like they've been aggrieved by some decision that was made. And then they will therefore not likely be able to come in and say, I want to have a lawsuit. I want to take you to court. You can't guarantee that people won't sue you. Somebody that wants to sue you is going to go get a lawyer and they'll probably be able to do something. But in general, the more you're able to resolve disputes before they arise by having good policies in place and treating people fairly, it saves money down the road because it will minimize the number of legal issues that could arise. HR also supports the organization's overall strategy by conducting planning. How many employees do we have? How many employees do we need? How do we hire people? Are we expanding? Are we contracting? You want to look at talent management as well. You want to identify what everybody can do. You want to have a pool of skills and abilities that various employees can do. Sometimes somebody in one job could be very adept at doing something in the short term on a project or handling another job if somebody happens to be out. Being able to manage all of that information and apply it correctly so that you can assign different tasks to people to take advantage of what their skill sets are is very important. You also want to use evidence-based HR, so that's collecting all this data, turning it into information, and then using that information for evidence-based decisions. You don't want to base decisions on guesses or gut feelings. You want to base decisions on facts. And if you collect that information and put it in the proper format and correct for any biases that may be involved, you will end up making better decisions. And if you make better decisions, you will make more money, which is the ultimate objective of most companies. HR is also critical to be able to support the organization's strategy. It involves a lot to do with corporate culture, corporate social responsibility. The stakeholders that are involved, you want to make sure that they're satisfied. A brief word on stakeholders. A stakeholder is basically anybody who has an interest in a company's success. This could be your employees, the owners, the managers, your customers. It could be, if you are a manufacturing entity, it could be the people who live in the neighborhood because they have a stake in whether or not you're making a lot of noise or polluting the area. The government is interested in what's going on because they may be regulating the products that you're doing. The IRS is going to want to know how much money you've made so that they can tax you appropriately. Anybody that has an interest in the outputs of your company is a stakeholder. A shareholder is someone who owns stock in a corporation. There are different forms of companies. You could be a sole proprietorship, a partnership, or a corporation. Shareholders are typically people who own shares of a corporation. You could refer to a shareholder as a co-owner of another company in a different form, but usually it means corporation. The way it works is that all shareholders are stakeholders, but not all stakeholders are shareholders. What that means, if you're a shareholder, you're an owner of the company, so you obviously have a stake in what's going on, but you can have a stake in a company without actually being a shareholder. So they are similar terms, but they are distinct. Many companies are also focusing on sustainability, making sure that you can maintain a profit without depleting resources in the future. So that could be natural resources, green energy, recycling, things like that. Whether or not it is required by law, it may be something that your customer base is interested in, and you could attract customers by making sure that they are aware that you are able to do these types of things if that's important to them in the industry in which you conduct your business. The different types of skills that the HRM professionals should have been identified by the Society for Human Resources Management. That's SHRM. This is an organization that caters to people who work in HR. They establish best practices, they conduct training, they provide certification. So if you're interested in it, you could go to their website and find out what types of services they provide. But they come up with various levels of competencies that people who work in HR should have. The skills and knowledge that go into being a successful HR employee are basically 4 categories. You need to have technical expertise. This is really knowing about what HR is, what it encompasses. Having interpersonal skills, being able to talk to people with empathy and professionalism. Manage your relationships and conduct communications in an appropriate manner. Having knowledge of the business, whether it's the general business of the company that's doing, you don't need to know how to manufacture the things that you're making, but you should understand what they are so that you can make sure that you hire the right kind of people and you can serve the managers that are looking for the type of people to be able to perform the duties that your company does. So you need to have a general sense of business acumen for what the company is doing, but you should also be able to do things like consult with supervisors, other managers in the company, provide services, give them analytics, make recommendations, come up with basically good business sense so that you can provide valuable advice to people going forward. Leadership is also important. Leadership and management are 2 different things. Management is making sure people show up on time, handling their paychecks, taking care of all the administrative functions. Leadership is, by definition, implying that you are doing something and people are following you. They're following your lead. You're providing motivation. Ideally, supervisors and managers would be good at both management and leadership, but that's really the case. If you're great at both leadership and management, you're probably a superstar. Some people are better at one, some people are better at the other. You'd like to be able to handle both of them, so if you're weaker in one area and stronger in the other, you should try to make sure that the deficits are eliminated to the extent that you can. Leadership is important. Making sure that you can get people to understand why something is important. That's a little bit more than just being a manager. That's more than just coming up with a policy. Management and administrative functions will come up with the policies. Leadership is getting people to understand why they're important and why they should follow them. The next chart is basically just a pie chart of all the things that feed into the competencies. I'm not going to go through it here, but again, it's in the book and it's in the PowerPoint, so please read through it. The responsibilities of supervisors and the corporate culture that has been established, that usually comes from the company's founders, the first supervisors, the people who are running the company. They really impart a lot of their personality, a lot of their belief systems into it. And the company tends to reflect what they are and were going forward. Supervisors do have a lot of HR responsibilities, and it's the HR staff's job to be able to support them when they do that, because they don't do it every day. They may only hire people once every 6 months or a couple of years. They should know how to do it, but it's really up to HR to be able to walk them through it and make sure that they have the tools necessary to perform. When we're talking about corporate culture, this is the belief systems, the trends, the way that people behave, the norms and attitudes of an organization. On a wider spectrum, culture applies to nations and populations around the world. When you have an isolated population, they tend to morph into a distinct way of behavior. So American culture is different than French culture, and French culture is different than Chinese culture. And even within China, there's a lot of different indigenous groups and a lot of different cultural groups. Companies are no different, because you are going to be rather insular from other companies. When you have people that only work with each other, they tend to come up with vernacular attitudes, ways of behavior that kind of meet what's going on with that company, and it will be different from company to company. A good, positive corporate culture can be very beneficial to managers, because if you have a positive corporate culture, it tends to fix a lot of problems on its own. If people value their job, if they are accountable and they hold others accountable, a lot of the issues that may pop up that managers have to take care of will be fixed because you have a strong, positive corporate culture. If you have a negative corporate culture, it's kind of imperative that HR works to try to correct some of those things to some level of transformative leadership. The next graphic kind of also just shows all the different areas in which HRM is involved: defining jobs, forecasting HR needs. Do we have too many people? Do we not have enough? Provide training, interviewing candidates, appraising performance. All of that is important. Again, I'm not going to go through each one of these on the graphic, but please read through the book and make sure that you're aware of how they all tie together. Ethical behavior is typically the root of a lot of the laws that are applicable, but laws and ethics are not the same thing. They may be very similar and related, but ethics are basically the policies that a company has come up with, the principles of what is right and what is wrong, what is acceptable and what is not acceptable. Ethical behavior is anything that complies with that. So most companies, in an effort to establish their corporate culture, they will come up with a code of ethics and they will train people on it. This is what's important. You'll have a mission, you'll have a vision, you'll have values. The mission and the vision is really tied to the performance that you're trying to do, what the objectives are, what the company's trying to do, why does it exist. But then when you get to the value statements, what things that you look at that are important, and how you're going to actually effectuate all of the things that are required to be able to accomplish that mission. And that does include a code of ethics and the establishment of a corporate culture that would reflect those ethical values. Some of the rights of employees that should be managed and enforced by HR: free consent. You don't have to work for someplace if you don't want to work there. You can't be forced to do things that are not legal. So you have the ability to work or not work for someone, and employees do maintain that right. They do have a right to privacy. It is not the same as if they're at their own house, because if they're doing things at work, the expectation of privacy is a little bit limited. However, we talked already about things like medical information, financial information. If there is not a business need to know it, then other people should not be looking at it, and privacy should be maintained. People have freedom of conscience, freedom of speech. You may be able to take action if they're saying something publicly about the company because you don't feel that an employee should be saying something about that. But there's a fine line between someone being able to exercise their freedom of speech outside of business, Should you be able to take action against them at their job because they said something that does not concern your business that the company doesn't agree with? There can be a very blurry line between what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, but companies have gotten in trouble for taking action against people for merely speaking about an opinion on something, which is much different than taking action. If you've done something, that's different than simply expressing an opinion about some issue that may be of import to you. Due process is also important, and this is a legal term. If you think of the term due process, most people have heard it. It literally means that there is a process in place and it is owed to you. It is due to you. So if you, for example, get arrested by the police, they don't just put you in jail. They arrest you. They explain that they had probable cause for the arrest. They tell you what the charges are. They give you the opportunity to get a lawyer. You're indicted. You have to go to the court. You make a plea. They have a trial. They decide if you're guilty or not. That's all part of the process. There should be due process in your interactions with your employer, too. When you get hired, what process is owed to you? We go through your background. We go through your resume. We do an interview. You get hired for the job. We get you on the job. If you did something wrong, if we have some type of employee performance section, we should be applying these same policies to everybody equally. That is what is due to the employees. So a due process sense, while it's not technically a legal requirement within the organization, if you follow it as if it were, then people feel much more satisfied in their job because they feel like they're being treated more fairly. Due process is really the basis of fairness because it ensures that if something happens to me and then another employee is in the exact same situation, they will be treated exactly the same. If you do not have an existing process and you do not follow it appropriately, you will not get these consistent outcomes. And when you don't have consistent outcomes, you have people that are wondering why they're being treated differently. That can lead to demotivation, dissatisfaction, and ultimately lack of retention. They could terminate their employment and move on someplace else because they are unhappy with the fact that they are not being treated fairly. So due process, if you establish elements of due process and adhere to them, it can really help your employee relations and minimize any potential lawsuits and other problems that could arise in the future. So for ethical behavior, companies usually adhere to 4 principles. They want to make sure that there are mutual benefits in relationships with customers, vendors, and clients. If you treat your customers well, they'll treat you well. If you treat your employees well, they'll treat the employer well. Same with vendors and clients. It's a mutually beneficial arrangement. If anybody is perceiving that it's only a one-way arrangement, then that relationship is probably not going to be sustainable. Employees also have responsibility for the actions of the company. If they are doing something for the company, they have to know that they are not acting on their own behalf. They are acting on behalf of the company, their employer, all of their colleagues, potentially all of their providers and other vendors that work with them. There's also a sense of purpose and vision that employees have value and that they should use it in their day-to-day work. That goes both ways. Employees should be cognizant of it, but managers should also respect employees and make sure that they know that they are valued. People tend to value things that they do if they also feel valued themselves. You also want to emphasize fairness, and the best way to do that is to implement factors related to due process, as we previously discussed. All of these things can be included in the ethical code and trained to people, and oftentimes you may do a refresher training. You get trained on ethics when you get hired during your onboarding. Maybe every couple of years you could do a brief half hour, just have a meeting, maybe an e-learning, maybe have managers talk about it every time they go through their annual employee evaluation, making sure that this is kept at the forefront instead of just something that's in a book somewhere that nobody ever reads, makes it more of a living document and something that people do actively adhere to. Figure 1.5 illustrates basically how ethics work in terms of fair and equitableness. Again, this is reflecting information that's in the book, so please review. If you want to have a career in human resources management, one of the things you might want to consider is how much they pay. Salaries can vary depending on experience and education. You could be a lower level HR employee. You could be an admin. You could be a higher level. You could be an HR manager. Obviously, the pay and the responsibilities will vary. It could also vary between company size. If you're the HR director for a company with 10,000 employees, that's going to be a much different job than it is if you are an HR director for a company with 25. Positions include generalists, which do various things. You could specialize in some areas. You could be a benefits specialist. You could be just in healthcare, for example. You could be a generalist that handles all of the onboarding, separation, documentation, performance management, and the like. Most of the positions that you would be looking at outside of some very basic administrative do require a college degree. The next slide does show basically some rough estimations of how much people get paid depending on their position. If you're a compensation and benefits manager along with a human resources manager, you'd probably be making in the 130, 140 range. Compensation and benefits manager, because it is a more specific requirement and it does require potentially more specific knowledge and education, it could compete with a director of human resources or a human resources manager in terms of pay. Training and development manager would be next on that list, typically above $120,000. Labor relations, instructional designers, etc. Usually the instructional designers work on behalf of the training and development manager. Then you have specialists and other various types of admin assistants and generalists, ranging from your average salaries of around $40,000 to $50,000. So this is just basically a background if anybody has an interest in moving into HR. The next few slides are just some summaries, so that'll conclude Chapter 1. We'll be moving on to Chapter 2 next.